Against the horizon of Qadisiyyah, 3,000 weary warriors brace themselves, leather worn thin, blades chipped, yet hearts unbroken. Before them, a sea of 200,000 Persians glitters like sunlight on water. Wait! By the Lord of the Kaaba! I have killed Rustam!
ولا نعبد إلا
Imagine standing in the middle of a desert. The year is 636 AD. You are tired, you are hungry. Your armor is made of hardened leather and scraps of chainmail. In your hand, you hold a simple sword, chipped from years of desert raids. And then you look up. Facing you is the superpower of the ancient world, the Sassanid Empire. They haven't just brought soldiers, they have brought monsters. 33 massive war elephants, each one a living tank capable of crushing a man into paste with a single step. Behind them, an army estimated by some historians to be nearly 200,000 strong. A glittering ocean of steel spanning the horizon. You are one of the Muslims at Qadisiyyah. You are outnumbered. You are outgunned. And according to every military calculation known to man, you are already dead. This isn't just a battle. This is the collision of two worlds. On one side, the Sassanid Persians, the sophisticated, wealthy titans who had fought Rome to a standstill for centuries. On the other, the Rashidun Caliphate, a new, rugged force exploding out of the Arabian Peninsula, fueled not by gold, but by an unshakable belief. If the Persians win today, the spread of Islam likely stops dead in its tracks. History as we know it changes instantly. But if the Muslims win, if this ragtag group of desert warriors manages to topple the giants, it will be the single greatest military upset in human history. So how did a force with no heavy cavalry, no siege engines, and barely any supplies manage to shatter an empire? The answer lies in a specific set of tactics, a few thousand reinforcements, and 3 days of blood that turned the desert sand into red mud. Welcome to the Battle of Qadisiyyah. To understand why this battle was so impossible, we have to understand who was fighting. This wasn't a skirmish, it was a collision between an ancient, immovable object and a brand new, unstoppable force. First, let's look at the enemy, the Sassanid Empire. For 400 years, they ruled a massive chunk of the world, stretching from modern-day Turkey to Pakistan. They were incredibly advanced. They had heavy industry, intricate bureaucracy, and a military machine that included the legendary Savaran, heavy armored cavalry that were the direct ancestors of the medieval European knight. They were clad in mail from head to toe, riding horses that were also armored. In a straight-up fight, they were invincible. And then there were the elephants. These weren't just animals, they were psychological weapons. The Persians would attach heavy wooden howdahs to their backs, filled with archers and grenadiers throwing naphtha, ancient napalm. To an Arab horse, the smell of an elephant was terrifying. To an Arab soldier, the sight of one was a nightmare. Now look at the Muslims, the Rashidun Army. Just a few years prior, these tribes were fighting each other over water wells. They had no formal military academies, no heavy industry. Their empire was still in its infancy, but they had something the Persians didn't: mobility, speed, and a total lack of fear of death. The Persians were fighting for a king, for a paycheck, for the status quo. The Muslims were fighting for Jannah, paradise. This made them dangerous, it made them reckless. The tension had been building for months. The Caliph Umar, sitting in Medina, knew that to secure the borders, the Sassanid threat had to be neutralized. He appointed Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas as the commander, a close companion of the Prophet, but a man who was suffering from a severe illness. In fact, during this entire battle, Sa'd would be physically unable to ride a horse. He would have to command 30,000 men while lying prostrate on a mattress in a makeshift tower overlooking the field. The Persian commander was Rustam Farrokhzad. He was the most powerful man in Persia, a brilliant strategist who actually didn't want this fight. His astrologers had told him that disaster awaited. He tried to delay, he tried to negotiate. But the Emperor Yazdegerd III demanded blood. He wanted the desert rats crushed. So Rustam marched. He brought an army so large it reportedly took days to pass a single point. He crossed the river, destroyed the bridge behind him to ensure his men wouldn't flee, and set up camp at Qadisiyyah. The stage was set, 30,000 Muslims against a Persian force that dwarfed them 5, maybe 6 times over. The big problem wasn't just the numbers. It was that the Muslims had no answer for the elephants. They had never fought them on this scale before. And as the sun rose on the first day, the ground began to tremble. The battle didn't start with a charge, it started with a duel. In ancient warfare, champions would ride out to challenge the enemy, boosting morale. The Muslims dominated this phase. Their swordsmanship was fast, brutal, and unencumbered by heavy armor. They cut down several Persian champions. Rustam, watching from his throne, realized his men were losing heart before the main fight had even begun. He ordered the general assault, and he played his ace card immediately. The Elephant Corps moved forward. This is where the plan fell apart for the Muslims. The Arab horses, unaccustomed to the smell and the trumpeting screams of the elephants, panicked. The Muslim cavalry, their greatest asset, was rendered useless. The horses bucked and fled, refusing to go near the beasts. The Persian heavy infantry marched in behind the elephants, creating a wall of steel. The elephants smashed into the Muslim infantry lines. It was carnage. Men were tossed into the air or trampled. The Persian archers, sitting atop the elephants, rained arrows down on the chaotic mass below. The Muslim line began to buckle. They were being pushed back, foot by bloody foot. Sa'd, watching from his tower, was desperate. He sent orders to the tribe of Banu Asad to hold the line at all costs. These men threw themselves at the elephants, attacking the trunks and the girths, trying to bring them down with spears. It was a suicide mission. They managed to push the beasts back slightly, but the cost was horrific. By the time the sun set on the day of disorder, the Muslims had suffered heavy casualties. Their cavalry was neutralized, their morale was shaken. They survived the day, but only just. And they knew that tomorrow the elephants would be back. They needed a miracle. Day 2. The day of succor. The sun rises over a field of bodies. The mood in the Muslim camp is grim. They are checking their weapons, bandaging wounds, preparing to die. But then a cloud of dust appears on the horizon. Coming from the direction of Syria is the vanguard of a reinforcement army. Leading them is a man whose name would become a legend, Al-Qaqa ibn Amr. The Caliph Abu Bakr once said that the voice of Qaqa in an army is better than 1,000 men. Today, he would prove it. Qaqa didn't just march his men into camp. He was a master of psychological warfare. He broke his reinforcement into small groups of 100. He ordered them to arrive one after another with gaps in between, drumming and kicking up as much dust as possible. To the Persians, it looked like an unending stream of fresh warriors pouring into the valley. 100 men, then another 100, then another. It terrified them. They thought the entire army of Syria had arrived. Qaqa immediately galloped onto the battlefield and challenged the Persian commanders to a duel. He killed the first, he killed the second. The Persian morale, which had been high the night before, plummeted, but the real genius of Day 2 was how they handled the horses. The elephants were resting, their howdahs were being repaired, so the Persians relied on their heavy cavalry. Qadisiyyah improvised. He ordered his men to take camels and drape them in strange fabrics, hanging bells and terrifying masks on them. They charged these monster camels at the Persian horses. It was a reverse of day one. Now the Persian horses were the ones panicking. They had never seen camels dressed like demons. The Persian cavalry lines broke. The Muslims pushed forward. It was a brutal grind, but by sunset, the momentum had shifted. The arrival of Qadisiyyah, this small force of 3,000, had completely changed the energy of the battle. But the Persians weren't done. The elephants were fixed. And day 3 was coming. Day 3. The day of hardship. This was the grinder. The Persians, frustrated by the trickery of the previous day, launched everything they had. The elephants were back, and this time they were guarded by heavy infantry to stop the Arabs from getting close. The situation was critical. The elephants were tearing holes in the Muslim lines that could not be filled. If they didn't stop the beasts, the army would break. Sadi sent a specific message to Qadisiyyah and his brother: target the eyes and the trunks. It sounds simple, but imagine trying to execute that. You have to run through a chaotic battlefield, dodge heavy cavalry, avoid thousands of arrows, and get close enough to a thrashing 4-ton monster to stab it in the eye. Qadisiyyah and a small team of specialists identified the 2 lead elephants, the white elephant and the scabby elephant. These were the alphas. If they panicked, the others would follow. They launched a coordinated attack. While one group distracted the guards, Qadisiyyah and his men charged the white elephant. They threw spears directly into its eyes. At the same moment, another soldier sliced its trunk with a sword. The beast screamed, a sound so loud it drowned out the battle, and reeled back. Blind and in agony, it turned around and trampled its own Persian soldiers. Moments later, the scabby elephant was hit in the eye. The plan worked perfectly. The 2 alpha elephants panicked and stampeded backward, charging through the Persian lines, crushing their own infantry and leading the rest of the elephants off the field. The tanks were gone. Now it was just man against man, steel against steel. The fighting was so intense that the sun went down and nobody stopped. Usually, battles in the ancient world paused at night. Not this time. This is the most terrifying part of the Battle of Qadisiyyah. It became known as Laylat al-Harir, the night of clangor, or the night of rumbling. The generals lost control. It was too dark to send signals. It was too loud to shout orders. The armies were locked in a death embrace, unable to disengage. For hours, in pitch blackness, the only sounds were the clashing of swords, the screams of the dying, and the guttural grunts of exhausted men. Veterans who survived said it was unlike anything they had ever seen. Men were fighting by the light of sparks flying from their weapons. There was no strategy anymore. It was pure endurance. Qadisiyyah, realizing that silence would kill their morale, ordered his men to chant and recite poetry. Amidst the screams, the sound of the Quran and heroic verses rose from the Muslim lines. It was a psychological lifeline. It kept them awake. It kept them fighting. By dawn, both armies were shattered. They had been fighting for 24 hours straight. Thousands lay dead. The field was a butcher shop. But the Persians, despite their superior numbers, were breaking. They were fighting for a paycheck. The Muslims were fighting for their souls. As the sun rose on the 4th day, Qadisiyyah shouted to his men, "Victory is for those who have patience for one more hour." He led one final desperate charge. Day 4, the final push. The Persian lines were thin. Their heavy cavalry was exhausted. Their elephants were gone. And then nature itself seemed to intervene. A massive dust storm blew in from the desert, blowing directly into the faces of the Persians. They were blinded. The sand stung their eyes and clogged their throats. The Muslims, with the wind at their backs, surged forward. The Persian center collapsed. The Muslims broke through and headed straight for the command post, Rustam's throne. Rustam, the great general, had tried to escape the dust by taking shelter under a mule or a camel near his baggage train. But a Muslim soldier, Hilal ibn Ulafa, spotted him. The climax of the battle wasn't a grand duel. It was chaotic and fast. Rustam tried to fight back, but the storm and the surprise were too much. Hilal struck him down. Moments later, Hilal climbed onto Rustam's golden throne, raised his bloody sword, and shouted the words that would end the Persian Empire. "By the Lord of the Kaaba, I have killed Rustam." Panic spread like wildfire. Seeing their commander's empty throne, the Persian army, 200,000 strong, disintegrated. They turned and fled towards the river. But the bridge was destroyed. They were trapped. It was a slaughter. The invincible army was pushed into the river and drowned by the thousands. The Battle of Qadisiyyah was over. Let's take a breath and let's look at what just happened. A force of roughly 30,000 irregulars with no heavy equipment just dismantled a superpower 5 times their size. How? It wasn't just faith, it was tactical brilliance. First, adaptability. When the elephants crushed them on day 1, they didn't fold. They invented new tactics. They attacked the trunks. They used the camels to scare the horses. They adapted faster than the rigid Persian bureaucracy could react. Second, meritocracy versus aristocracy. The Persian commanders were there because of their bloodline. The Muslim commanders, like Kaka, were there because they were the best warriors. Rustam was fighting to preserve a hierarchy. The Muslims were fighting as a brotherhood where the lowest soldier felt equal to the general. But the biggest realization is this: the 3,000 reinforcements didn't just add numbers, they added momentum. Kaka's arrival broke the psychological deadlock. He turned a defensive hold into an offensive storm. This battle broke the spine of the Sassanid Empire. Within a few years, the entire empire would fall. The culture, the religion, the language of the region, everything began a transformation that shapes the Middle East to this very day. If Qadisiyyah goes the other way, Islam remains a local Arabian religion. The Persian Empire likely continues for another 500 years. The Crusades never happen. The Ottomans never rise. The modern world is unrecognizable. History is often told as a story of big numbers. The biggest army wins. The richest country rules. But Qadisiyyah teaches us something different. It teaches us that morale, belief, and the willingness to endure one more hour of hardship can defy the math. The 3,000 who arrived to help the 30,000 didn't just bring swords, they brought hope. And in the grind of war, hope is the deadliest weapon of all. The Persian Empire is gone, buried under the sands of Iraq. But the legacy of that day, the day the desert swallowed the elephants, lives on. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's greatest upsets, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are building a library of the most intense battles human history has ever seen, and you don't want to miss the next one. Until next time, stay curious.